Okay. I did something else. How's that looking?
You're live.
Okay, looks like I'm live. Okay, hey, right on time, 12:30. Hey everybody, good afternoon. If you are joining us, you are here for the Tsismisan talk story for the census, and it's my honor to be able to moderate this for you. We have a great panel of speakers today. The topic is small business, COVID-19, and the census. And I'm Annalisa Burgos. I am a co-anchor and reporter for KITV4 Island News. I anchor the weekend morning show, so be sure to check that out anytime you're here in Hawaii, as well as online. And today we're talking about a small business. Tsismisan actually means gossip in Tagalog, which is the Filipino main language, and we're actually doing something positive with it because we've had this series of discussions on different topics across the scope of law, religion, now small business, and we're talking about this against the backdrop of health, public safety when it comes to COVID-19, as well as being counted as part of the census. So today we have the honor of talking with policymakers and decision makers, because last week, we talked to small business owners who are really struggling, and it's something that we've been covering extensively here in Hawaii and all across the world, with how companies and small businesses are really not able to survive without the tourism, without the visitors here in Hawaii. So let's first go ahead and introduce our distinguished panel of speakers for today. So excited to start this off with our Congressman Ed Case, who is joining us from Washington, D.C. Good evening to you, Congressman. He, of course, proudly represents Hawaii's 1st Congressional District, and amongst his committee assignments, he sits on the House Appropriations Committee, Military, Construction, Veterans Affairs, and related agencies, including Commerce. Good evening, Congressman Case.
Good evening, and mabuhay from Capitol Hill. Really good to be with you.
Mabuhay. All right, and our next panelist is Sherry Menor McNamara, who is the president and CEO of the Chamber of Commerce Hawaii. She's the youngest, first female, and first Japanese Filipino leader in the organization's 170-year history. And of course, she's raised in Hilo and has been a member or a head of the chamber with them since 2006. Good to see you, Sherry.
Good to see you as well. Thank you for having me here.
Great to see you. Okay, so next we have Andrea Kaimo as the Vice Consul and Economic Officer of the Philippine Consulate General here in Hawaii. And she also spearheads Trabajo Hawaii, which is a consulate and Filipino community initiative to help businesses and workers affected by COVID-19. Very active in the community, so I know a lot of us know her. Aloha, Andrea.
Aloha, and good afternoon to you, Annalisa, and to everyone who's listening right now.
Wonderful. And then we have Jeffrey. Oh, sorry. I after you mentioned that your name is unique, Joffrey Gudyamat is the incoming president of the Filipino Chamber of Commerce of Hawaii and the immediate past president of the Structural Engineers Association of Hawaii, managing a couple of companies. He's currently the CEO of Structural Hawaii Inc., a design and engineering consulting firm, and he is also the president of Structural Builders Hawaii. That's a construction contracting company. And of course, he was also the 2019 Filipino Entrepreneur of the Year. Good to see you, Joffrey.
Yeah, thank you, Annalisa. It's a pleasure for me to be here. It's such an honor to be a part of such a distinguished panel. So thank you for having me.
Good to have you with us. And last but not least, our regular Annie Sokol, of course, with the U.S. Census Bureau. She's a partner specialist, always giving us the message of how important it is to have our communities counted, not just the Filipino community, but every community across our islands. So good to see you, Annie.
Thank you, Annalisa. You too.
And of course, I just wanted to also welcome our radio listeners, because at the same time, we are simulcasting this Facebook Live on 3 radio stations. On Oahu, we're broadcasting live from KNDI 1270. On Maui, we have Mix 105.5 FM, and on Kauai 107.9 FM KTOH HD3. So welcome to our radio listeners. If you are also participating on our Facebook Live, feel free to comment in the comment section. You're welcome to ask us questions as we go along. We have our own discussion points, but of course, we love to hear from our viewers and our listeners. And of course, you can follow the Filipino Complete Count Committee on Facebook because they have some door prizes as well. And be sure to be up to date on all the different topics as the census goes on for the next few months. It's so important to get resources into our community. All right, then. So now that all of that housekeeping stuff is out of the way, let's get started. I wanted to first set the stage with the state of small business. We've been hearing about how difficult it's been for our businesses here in Hawaii. Let's start first with Joffrey and Sherry. Joffrey, tell us about what the mood is like in the community as a business owner, as someone who's been working closely with other small businesses like yourself. What are the results of kind of the relief efforts that you've seen from the federal government, from local counties?
Well, thank you, Annalisa. I'll start with the first question, the mood of businesses, small businesses. So obviously tourism and the travel industry is down. And I had a good friend tell me that he's thinking of shutting down his restaurant because of, the stay-home orders and things happening in the business community. But for me personally, things have actually picked up. The construction industry has been deemed an essential industry. And my engineering and architectural design office has been a support firm for a lot of the construction projects. So we've been busy. In fact, we've been probably busier than ever. I don't know if it's because people are staying home now and they see all the home projects that they have to do, or interest rates are down. I don't know what it is, but we're busier than ever. In fact, we hired 2 new engineers. Programs such as the PPP and the Flexibility Act, which Congress just recently passed, really helps. Of course, the economic injury disaster loan is really also helpful. The $10,000 that you can use to inject into your revenue shortfalls is really, really beneficial to bridge the gap from now and through these hard periods. So we've been taking advantage of some of the programs, and as president of the Filipino Chamber of Commerce, it's my job really just to get the information out to all the small businesses.
Yeah, so important. Sherry, what about on your end?
Yeah, I just participated in another panel this past week, and it was encouraging to hear that the construction industry hasn't been as impacted as other businesses. But I will say that since COVID hit Hawaii in March, it's had a tremendous impact pretty much overnight. We started doing surveys since March, and these are statewide surveys in partnership with our neighbor island chambers. And about 50% said they had to shut their doors, whether temporarily or permanently, because of the significant impact. Fast forward 3 months later, you can imagine impact is much larger. We did a survey in partnership with UHERO, and it indicated that 1 in 4 businesses said that without additional relief, that they would have to shut their doors permanently. 32% of businesses said that they gained 0 revenue, and more than 40% said that they can't reopen until tourism reopens. So now that we have a date of when Trans-Pacific travel will be allowed on August 1st, hopefully we'll see progress in terms of confidence in commerce. And that's another aspect of it. I think there's still some lack of confidence in going out and spending money into our economy. 1, because obviously there's more than 200,000 collected unemployment insurance, but 2, the health and safety aspect of going out there and spending money, whether it's at the restaurant or retail. So we haven't seen that fast infusion of cash into the economy since things started opening up.
Yeah, so important, these resources for our community. Representative Case, turning to you now. What are you hearing from constituents? I know you've been working hard to get that money, that federal money, into the hands of these businesses.
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is that my office is completely open and available to answer any questions and help anybody out there. That's been my major goal in Hawaii over the last really difficult months for everybody. And the way to contact me is case.house.gov, case.house.gov. We have helped literally thousands of people and small businesses with their individual concerns, whether it be access to the small business assistance that Congress has passed, to questions on unemployment benefits, the direct payments, the economic injury payments, a whole range of issues. People have many kinds of issues when their lives are disrupted in such a severe way as the last couple of months. My experience is what Sherry is describing. It's been a tremendous shock. Of course, in Hawaii, small business is we have one of the highest levels of small business in the entire country. 96-97% of our businesses are small businesses, and as she pointed out accurately, many of them rely directly or indirectly on tourism. So although we have one of the best public health results in the entire country, we have one of the worst economic results in the entire country because we essentially had to shut our tourism industry to preserve our public health. And so the dislocation that many small businesses, average size of our small businesses is quite small in Hawaii. So the sum total of all of that, just incredible needs out there. Congress did pass a number of laws on an emergency assistance basis. My office and others scrambled to try to get that out as fast as we could. We, I think, did a pretty good job. We got about 24,000 paycheck protection program loans out to about 24,000 small businesses, about $2.5 billion. The economic injury disaster loans also, but you know, it's not enough. It's not enough. It really was intended for a survival emergency assistance just to get small businesses through a couple of months. And we're now through a couple of months and we are not open again. And so there's high difficulty in reopening and generating any kind of revenue. So in Congress, we have passed out of the United States House what we call the HEROES Act, which is another major level of assistance, hopefully also to our small businesses. That's over in the Senate right now, and I'm hoping that by the end of July, as Congress stays in session through July, we will be able to come up with another round of emergency assistance, which I think will be necessary for much of our country and especially for Hawaii.
Would that, sorry, just a follow-up, would that be another PPP or would that take another form?
Well, it's going to take a lot of different forms because we are tracking somewhere around 75 federal programs of one kind or another that are delivering emergency assistance to Hawaii. Some of it is PPP, some of it is agriculture, you know, some of it is education. A large portion of it is state and local government funding at 1.25 billion. I believe that we do need to fund small businesses specifically through the PPP program and the IDLE, EIDL, the economic injury disaster loans, which have also had, as Joffrey pointed out, a good solid result as well. So the programs have worked, but the problem is the programs for a short term, and now we're not in the short term anymore. We're moving into a midterm, and that's where the critical needs are, is to get us through a couple more months until, as Sherry pointed out, we can reopen the economy and get these businesses getting their own revenue going again.
Mm-hmm. And now let's turn to Andrea. You know, there were a lot of business connections bridging the Philippines and Hawaii. And I know you were making a lot of great strides in that connection. So give us an update on how that's being affected with COVID-19 and if there are any relief efforts and programs for those people.
Yes, as we all know, this pandemic has affected not only Hawaii, but all the countries all over the world. And right now, what we're seeing is that many of our businesses are struggling there, especially here in Hawaii, because a lot of our businesses are tied to tourism. And since we've closed down our hotels, we've closed down travel, there's a lot of businesses that are reliant on tourism that are currently suffering. And a lot of the employees are also furloughed and are laid off. And that's really one of the concerns that we have for the consulate, because we know that a lot of Filipinos are working in this industry. And this has been the focus of our response. How do we help the people that are temporarily laid off and furloughed because of this pandemic?
Mm-hmm. And I know just from personal experience and all the wonderful stories about our Filipino workforce in the healthcare community who have really been on the front lines of all of this. So have you heard those types of stories as well?
Yes, we're very proud of our healthcare workers that are helping in this fight for COVID-19 pandemic. And we're glad not only for our healthcare workers, but those that are serving in the front lines, in the media, in the delivery services, in the retail services. These people are also the backbone of our response to this pandemic.
And I know we talk about, I think the common thread that I heard from everyone here is it's not enough. What has been done is just the beginning. We need so much more. We spoke to some business owners across the islands last week about their biggest concerns and their wish lists. And they really talked about, say, for example, let's talk about rent. Rent relief is such a huge ask because, as you know, it's expensive to do business here in Hawaii. The cost of rent just outweighs everything else, it almost feels like, when I talk to some of these business owners. Let's start with you, Representative Case. What is your sense of how we can address that particular problem?
Well, first of all, the PPP and idle loans were intended to address that particular issue because we did require in those bills that a fair portion of them went towards keeping employees on the payroll. That was the number one goal of PPP was to make sure that employees could stay on payrolls with healthcare benefits, even if their employers could not generate the revenue to pay them. The federal government stepped in and handled that for a period of time. That was far better than them going over to the unemployment office. But that money was also available to help out for non-paycheck protection issues such as rent, number one. And then the idle loans similarly. So that money was available and I think was used by many small businesses to help out with the rent. And many of the landlords, of course, forebore the rent or else reduced the rent or rolled the rent a number of different ways. Where we are right now, though, is coming to the fifth month of that, and that's where we get the most concern in my office is commercial rent payments. What is my landlord going to do? Am I going to be able to get more assistance? And that's clearly our intent, is to provide more assistance across the country so that people can actually take care of their non-payroll related expenses in addition to their payroll related expenses. And we did, in fact, in the bills that we passed, give some rent relief on a national basis, but that was a limited period of time. So the best advice I can give to folks on that is to go directly to their landlords and make those arrangements with their landlords. After all, their landlords would prefer a tenant that has some resources, some ability, as opposed to an empty space, I would assume. And let's not forget that those landlords are also getting assistance. So one thing that I suggest to people is to say to their landlord, well, did you get assistance? Because it should translate all the way through the chain. I mean, if I got assistance, but I'm hammering somebody else that owes me money, that's not fair. And so I believe that it's got to, same thing with mortgages. If I have a mortgage payment due, and my banker is not going to work with me, but that banker got assistance, that's not fair. So that's clearly something that Congress has got in our sights. But it's going to take a combination of federal and state assistance and everybody working together, especially where you have landlord-tenant situations, especially where you have banker-lender situations. Yeah,
ideally, you'd have a landlord that's understanding, as you said, that would work with the tenant. But I know, Sherry, we hear so much from the business owners that don't have the luxury of renegotiating their leases with their landlords. I've talked to several people that say they just can't defer. It's just a matter of putting off the inevitable, and then the bills pile up, and then they're going to have to close. So what are you thinking on your end? What needs to be done to help in terms of rent relief?
I mean, I agree with Congressman. Every tenant needs to work with their landlord because every tenant has a different situation pre-COVID, during COVID, and moving forward. So they all have their different situations. So the first things first is to work with your landlord because landlord has bills as well. And so as much to extent possible, work within that situation. But with this different relief, such as the PPPs, and I know the city and county of Honolulu has also created some grants to extend to small businesses to offset some of these costs, as well as different islands have also done the same thing. But again, I think the big picture is that without opening the economy, there's only so much funding that can go around. And so what we need to do is immediately restore, open our economy so that the cash can start flowing through. Because without that, there's only so much band-aids you can use to fix the situation, unfortunately. It's a challenging situation, and small businesses have a lot of fixed costs. And so we understand that. But there's only so much money, too, from the government standpoint that goes around as well. So, without tourism opening up, as well as restoring confidence, we cannot keep adding to money going around in the grants, et cetera, because that's going to run out eventually as well.
Are you confident in the pre-travel plan that's been announced? Do you feel like whatever was announced is enough to get people back in?
Yeah, I think businesses just needed certainty. They needed a timeline. They needed some structure to know that, okay, this is the date that we're going to open up so that they can prepare. For example, hotels, they need 1 month to prepare, train their workforce, ensure the environment is prepared for the new environment, as well as all the other businesses that are associated in the ecosystem. I think it's a first step. It's not foolproof. There will be cases, unfortunately, and that's why it's incumbent on all of us, each and every one of us, to be accountable, wear our mask, be respectful for each other's environment, practice physical distancing, etc. That's going to be key to ensure that we mitigate the rise in cases. It will happen, but we have an opportunity to be a part to ensure that the cases won't surge like other states.
Yeah, speaking of which, 27 today. I mean, that's the largest we've had in quite a while, single day. So we're already seeing the effects of surges happening across the country. And if we start, and so the concern I'm hearing from people also is public health. We're starting to reopen and people are starting to come in. And as we know, if our numbers are low here, it has to have come from people coming home, Kamaaina returning here, or, visitors. So what's your take on it, Joffrey? Are you worried? You need the tourists, but at the same time, you're seeing these surges happening across the country.
Well, to put it in perspective, we had 27 people that you announced a minute ago. But you look at California, for instance, who had 9,000 just the other day. And I think we really have to look at the hospitalization. We do have to change our procedures, how we handle clients. We've done some things in our business where we have to, the health and welfare of our employees are first and foremost. And so we've changed the way we operate, and it's not efficient, but implementing these different strategies to cope with the conditions is just the new norm. And industry has to adjust to it. We know that things aren't going to be perfect. We're not going to get the 35,000 visitors every day, as it was before. But we're not asking for perfection. We just want improvement. And so opening the doors and starting to stimulate and get the economy going in is really important. For me, really, it's a matter of. I feel it's really important that we start the economy up again. And if it's slow, it's slow. But the way our government works is, I'm afraid that the tax revenue shortfalls on the state side is going to affect small businesses, and they may start imposing other things. Like in the 2008-2009 recession, they imposed unemployment insurance increases, which was really impactful to small businesses who are just trying to survive in that day and age. And so I hope government realizes that they can't just put it on small businesses to make up for their shortfalls.
Is there an ask from your end, aside from, some of these relief programs as well as tourism reopening? Is there any other kind of ask that you're hearing from?
Well, I think that the Congress did the right thing in adjusting the PPP. Before, it used to be 75 and 25% respectively for your forgiveness. They changed it to 60 to 40, which means you have flexibility. Say you took out $100,000 in the PPP. With the 40% flexibility, you can use it for things like your rent or other things. And And that really helps. But eventually, I think what the government needs to do is stimulate construction, stimulate the business, and get people working again, whether it's through infrastructure projects or other types of public works projects, because those are projects that need to be done anyway. And if they can expedite those types of projects, and if Congress can fund some of those maybe federal, state, or even city projects, that keeps everybody busy. And it's not related to tourism or any of that, but it does stimulate our economy locally.
Mm-hmm. And what about you, Andrea? Tell us what you're hearing on your end in terms of, all of us are talking about the real dependence of our economy on visitors, on tourism, and it being global. Tell us about your perspective at the Philippine Consulate.
Well, I work for the government too, albeit the Philippine government, and I do understand the difficulty right now for policymakers in balancing our health concerns at the same time our economic concerns. There is really a need for us to be able to strike a balance between the two, because we cannot forever be closed. Our economies could not forever be shut down. So we gotta find a way wherein we'll be able to allow businesses to operate safely in the new environment. And that's, I think, the key here. How do we create policies that will ensure that our businesses operate safely, and at the same time, how do we also ensure that our public health is capable of handling influx of COVID-19 cases? So there has to be investment also on the public health side. So we need to be able to equip our hospitals, our medical facilities with the right tools for them to be able to manage COVID-19 moving forward. And at the same time, creating a policy environment wherein our businesses can operate safely under the new normal.
Mm-hmm. I want to just turn it back to Representative Case. You are in D.C. With a lot more cases than we're experiencing here in Hawaii. What's your sense of the balance there and just what you're seeing across the country from your colleagues?
Well, this is first and foremost a public health crisis. We have to start there. We can't start anywhere else because that's what's driving this. This is an international pandemic that has translated into a public health crisis in our country with many deaths and millions of cases, and it's a highly dangerous, highly contagious, highly fluid, highly complex situation. And so when I see folks across the country treating it as another kind of crisis first, I say, well, no, that's not correct. We have to start with the fact that this is a public health crisis, and we have to recognize that we did pretty darn well in Hawaii relative to the rest of the country. But we still have lost a lot of our own, and we're still at great risk because the way we got that result, as we all know, was to shut down tourism. So, it in some ways was an artificial world since we do need tourism. And so we do need to reopen it. And I agree with the plan that the governor has come up with, and Cherry is correct. It's a predictable plan. And Joffrey is correct too. Can you handle it from a hospital perspective? That's one of the keys. We're not gonna be able to reopen our economy and not have any COVID cases. The only way to do that would be to have nobody flying in and then drying up all the COVID that was inside Hawaii to start with, which is not realistic. So the question is, can we reopen in a way that keeps the COVID cases down to a point where the hospitals can handle it? That's the key here. And so we've got to start with that as a public health crisis, not as an economic crisis. To start as an economic crisis and then say, okay, fine, we have an economic crisis and let's figure out how to manipulate the public health side of it to fit what we want economically, that's not going to work. And we've seen that in spades in Florida, in Texas, in other states that opened too fast and that basically ignored the public health side of this. And now they're in their second wave, which was avoidable. We don't want that. We can't do that. If we open up too fast and spike COVID-19, not only risking our own public health, but the health of people that visit, not only risking capacity in our healthcare system, we're going to tank tourism all over again. And we can't do that. That's going to be even tougher the second time around. So we've got to find the right balance. I think we are finding the right balance. But what I see in the rest of the country is a lot of people not finding the right balance.
Yeah, definitely. And just kind of, again, the focus of the economy. And what's ironic, I find, is because our state is one of the most dependent on, tourism. And we're the ones that are laying low compared to all the other states. So I find that we're really being conservative when it comes to that. And that's a criticism that some business owners do have, though, to acknowledge that. I wanted to give you guys a break because now it's time to talk about the census, which is why we're all here together to increase participation by our citizens here to just ensure that we have some funding for all the great resources that we need going forward. So you guys take a break while I bring in Annie Sokol from the U.S. Census Bureau, and we'll talk a little bit about why it's so important to participate in this population survey. As we know, there was a very famous person that actually was the story of Jesus, of course, him participating in the first population survey that we know, the famous population survey in Bethlehem. So I love that story. You shared it at the very beginning, Annie.
Yes, me too.
Let's talk about, again, how are we doing? Give us an update on our count here in Hawaii.
Yeah, this is my favorite part. This weekend, our self-response score is at 57.8%, while nationwide numbers is at 61.7%. So just to give us a historical perspective, in 2010, Hawaii had a final self-response score of 64.1%. So compared to the nation's 74% in 2010. So I believe we can beat our 2010 numbers. We just have to do it together. Meanwhile, our county breakdown, Honolulu is currently at 64%, followed by Kauai at 48.5%. Maui is at 48%. Hawaii County is at 43.3% and rising daily, and Kalavao is at 11%.
Oh, we need to get that one a little bit more active in it.
Yes.
Remind us again, for people that haven't heard yet, why is it so important to participate in the census?
The census is very important. We all know that the numbers, it determines our representation in Congress. So that's our voice in the government. And it's also redistricting of the state of Hawaii boundaries. And again, the census impacts the funding that we receive for critical programs in our communities, from healthcare to education, transportation, and business recovery.
Mm-hmm. And I think in general, how does it help businesses? We're talking about small business and kind of how being counted could be part of this recovery effort. Tell us about that.
Yes, so small businesses have so much to benefit from the census. The free information that the census provide will give you more confidence, and you're not going in blindly in any decision that you have to make for your business. And one great resource actually that we have is the state of Hawaii, a state data center. They work closely with the U.S. Census Bureau. I want to give them a huge shout out because they produce local data products and anyone can use it. So please check them out. And we also give free workshops so you can make sense of all the information that we have and learn how to efficiently access them. And really, any federally funded loans or grants for small businesses and even for CARES Act census data is used to determine how much our community gets. So please remind your employees and share to your customers and to your communities how important the census is. And we have many resources in our website and social media. Please feel free to share them.
Mm-hmm. And what's this economic survey I'm reading about that the census is undertaking?
So aside from conducting our constitutionally mandated duty to conduct the 2020 decennial census, the Census Bureau actually conducts more than 100 surveys every year, and to provide the public, our community, the most useful, up-to-date, and quality data. And during this pandemic, the Census Bureau launched a household pulse survey and a small business pulse survey to help us determine what our families, our households need across the nation right now, and also gather information on how our small businesses are doing now and how initiatives such as the Paycheck Protection Program is helping them. The results of these surveys will help our decision and policymakers address the real needs in our communities. So if you're one of those who got a text message or an email from the Census Bureau, we strongly encourage you to participate.
Okay, definitely. And lastly, I wanted to find out, you guys are, your offices are back open. Are you going to be knocking on doors?
Yes, we're still planning on that. It's only starting mid-August. So we call it the non-response follow-up, which is really to knock on doors, but only for those who did not yet responded. So because we don't want to miss anyone, right? We don't want anyone to be left out in the count. Now, if you want to help us minimize the amount of work that we have to do, and you would rather do your census at your own leisure, please respond to the census online at 2020census.gov. You may also call 844-330-2020 for English and 844-478-2020 for Tagalog. We actually have 12 other non-English languages that you can, have a customer service and talk to. And you can also send back your paper questionnaire form to us. And of course, during this time that we have a pandemic, we have safety precautions in place, and we have to make sure that that's our main priority. But we can minimize the need for knocking on doors. But it's only if we all cooperate and we all respond. And that's why we would like to remind everyone to be proactive and do your self-response. It's still the best response.
Yeah, that's true. It's so easy. I did it in like 2 minutes. I got my little, card, and so I can vouch for that. So, and I don't want you knocking on my door, Annie. We have to be safe.
Right? So do it now.
Do it before they come knocking. All right. So
mid-August, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You have plenty of time. All right. Let's bring back our. Thank you so much, Annie. So good to see you. Let's bring back our panelists for our next half of our discussion on small business and policy making and what we can do moving forward as we're in the recovery phase here in Hawaii. So of course we have Congressman Ed Case, we have Joffrey Kudyamat, Andrea Kaimo, and Sherry Menor McNamara from the chamber. So let's slowly file them back in. I did want to ask you guys what your experience with the census has been. Representative Case, have you done yours? I'm going to hope you did.
I absolutely have.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Huh?
I saw you do this, and then I was going to say, what?
No, that was, of course, I've done it, but it took me more than 2 minutes. So I don't know why. I don't know why I didn't get through it in 2 minutes. It took me about 9 or 10 minutes. But if I could, I really want to emphasize why this is so critical for Hawaii. I sit on the House Appropriations Committee, as you mentioned earlier. We fund somewhere around $1.5 trillion a year to our federal government, and much of that money is allocated across our country based on census figures. In Hawaii, for example, we've calculated, there have been studies that have calculated that for every person that is counted in the census, that's about $1,100 in federal support for Hawaii, which is critical to us. Every 1%, Annie was rattling off those percentage figures, every 1%, $16-17 million. If I could just bring this home very, very quickly, I'll give you 2 examples. Census figures are used to allocate federal support for minority-owned businesses. And as we all know, we have many, many ethnic minorities in Hawaii. In fact, the majority of Hawaii is ethnic minorities. And that money comes to Hawaii based on census figures. So if we are undercounting our ethnic minorities in Hawaii, we are essentially shortchanging our state in terms of federal support. Similarly, another example that came to mind was English as a second language in our schools. We have one of the highest rates of first-generation immigrant families in in fact, I think I have one of the highest in the entire country, which I'm very proud of. And many, many times they need special assistance and attention in our education system. We have English as second language programs, but if the federal government doesn't know that we have any English second language kids in Hawaii because people didn't take the census, that shortchanges not only Hawaii, but them. So I could give you literally 100 examples of this. So it's really, really critical to us all to be fully counted. So I want to make the pinch for the census as well.
Very important to get that insight. You know, you control, like you said, appropriations. You're the one funneling that money. So straight from the horse's mouth, as they say.
I'm trying to do it for the country, but I'm trying to do it for Hawaii too. And so if I don't have the information that I need to argue for Hawaii, that's a problem. But if I can like snap my fingers and say, yeah, in Hawaii we've got the highest rate of first generation immigrant, and of course English as a second language is important, and this is why we need this money for this program. That's gold in DC. So, and I use the census information all the time, by the way, to make my case up here in that way.
Mm-hmm. Well, good to hear that perspective. Sherry, what about you? What about your perspective on how important the census is for our business community here?
Oh, well, obviously, anything what Congressman Case mentioned, that we need to be responsible and do our part in filling out the census. And at the chamber, we've been promoting that as well, because we are, as they say, we're all in this together. And the more we provide, do our part, the more resources that will come to our state. And I just want to, if I could, reinforce what Congressman Case said, and also to thank him and his team really during this period and the support they have provided small businesses. From day one, the team just, contacted us as well as other organizations to communicate what kind of support is coming down in the pipeline, such as the PPP. And so, during this time, communication has been critical. And so I just wanted to extend our warmest appreciation to Congressman Case and his team.
Thank you. Thanks, Sherry.
And what about you, Geoffrey? Did you want to weigh in on your insight from the census as well?
Well, Congressman hit the nail on the head. Everything that he said is absolutely what we need. But I have to tip my hat to people like Benet Misalucha, who's spearheading the Filipino Complete Counts Committee and putting events forward like this so that we can get the word out to our constituents. It's very important.
Mm-hmm. And finally, Andrea, what about you? What's your take on this important count? Because Filipinos tend to not want to participate in this, I find. They kind of like to be in the background, to be the hard workers that they are, but not maybe take the time to do that. What do you find?
Yeah, so personally, my experience, I'm not American, but I'm participating in the census because I believe, as Annie mentioned, Congressman Ed mentioned, the census is very important in terms of the state getting kind of funding that it needs for a lot of services. That is why we highly encourage our kababayans, whether you are American, whether you are Filipino, whether you are processing your citizenship, a green card holder, it's important for us to get counted and participate in this census. It's our way of helping the state of Hawaii get the funding it needs for critical programs that was mentioned earlier.
Thank you for that. All right. So I just wanted to take a moment and maybe address some of these questions that we've gotten on Facebook from our Facebook viewers on KITV. This one is for Congressman Case. If you can tell us about some mandatory testing funding. Is there any allocation or news on that?
Well, there's certainly a lot of funding in our CARES Act for testing overall. Thus far, we do not have a situation where anybody is mandating testing, and that's been the problem that I've wanted to solve, because I feel that everybody that gets on a plane to Hawaii should be required to take a test before they get on that plane. Thus far, the federal government has said we don't have the authority in Hawaii to impose that requirement. And so I've been trying to get the Department of Health and Human Services here to do it on a public health basis, also introduce legislation to that effect. That's what I think we should be doing. But there's funding out there, the reality is that if somebody wants to get on a plane right now and come to Hawaii without taking a test, they can. And I don't think that's what we should be doing. So I'm gonna keep on keeping on this issue, because I think that's really the only way for us to really open in a real comfortable way. Is frankly, I don't want somebody from, with all apologies, Texas and Florida right now, but I'm just going to use it as an example. But if we've got planes coming in from Texas and Florida right now without people getting tested, that's a concern to me in Hawaii, because I don't know where they've been, or what. Obviously their state governments have not been as careful as other state governments in terms of keeping the rate down.
Yeah, I was reading just nearly 10,000 cases in one day. Like that's just mind-boggling. Like I can't imagine that. But also, you guys all talked about PPP and how important it has been, and Hawaii businesses did benefit in the 2 rounds. So, Representative Case, is there a 3rd round of PPP? I know we hinted at it, but is there any final confirmation on a 3rd round?
The U.S. House passed out the HEROES Act. I introduced that and co-introduced it and voted for it. That's in the Senate right now. And there are active discussions in the Senate, between the Senate, the House, and the White House right now on further support for our small businesses. But in all honesty, as I sit here today in Washington, D.C., I don't know what the answer to that question is. I know what I think we should be doing is, yes, we should have another round. And I know what my U.S. House has already voted on. Yes, there should be another round. But thus far, the administration and the majority in the Senate has not wanted to go down that road. But we'll see in about 4 weeks. And I know that's a tough thing to say because 4 weeks is an eternity for many of our small businesses. So one thing I do want to mention, by the way, is that although the federal government is the PPP funding is out there, the money that we gave to the state and city and county of Honolulu for small businesses, for whatever they wanted to use it for, really pretty discretionary. At least in the city and county of Honolulu situation, they have in fact set up a small business assistance program that small businesses in need of help should go to the city and county of Honolulu. And I believe the other counties are considering a similar program. So it's not just the federal government, it's also the state and the county governments that have some aid that they're thinking about making available.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard good news about that. I think it's been, at least on Oahu, 50 million. Sherry, can you tell us what you're hearing in terms of that small grant program? I know a lot of the counties have to kick in what they're getting from the federal government and create their own localized programs. How are the businesses reacting to what they're doing?
I think right now every little bit counts, and so that grant has been helpful, obviously. And the city and county of Honolulu just issued another round of the grant and expands the types of businesses that can apply. And the city has also opened up the economic recovery office as well. So we'll see what will come out of that. And I know the legislature is also looking at a number of small business initiatives. For example, one of them is to issue grants for PPEs for small businesses. As you know, that's an unbudgeted item for many. That's something we did not anticipate to factor into our budget. So that's something that I know the legislature is looking at. They're also looking at manufacturing grants to help some manufacturers pivot from what they were making to temporarily produce PPEs. So to help offset that cost, as well as help with that effort, as well as other initiatives too. So collectively, hopefully it'll move the needle and help. But in the end, though, it's going to be the sustainability and ensuring that small businesses that can continue to get the support. And many of them are tied again to tourism. So we will see when August 1st comes around and tourism does open, will the businesses be able to sustain their operations and move forward? We hope so. But in the meantime, we need to continue to find ways and collectively, collaboratively, partnerships, both public and private, to seek ways to support the small business community.
Yeah, I know we've talked about this also in our interviews with you, Sherry. The fact that businesses right now have become very innovative. They've had to think out of the box to survive, right? Because the old models don't work anymore. So I know you're doing at the Chamber some trainings and workshops and a lot of these informative things, but we've always talked about the need to diversify our economy. You mentioned manufacturing. That hasn't gotten the support we'd hoped. I've talked to some food manufacturers that say, they just can't compete with mainland companies. Right? The cost of doing business here. So what can we do to help them, especially during this very difficult time?
I think number one, we have to, there's a campaign out there, Be Vocal, Support Local, and we we need to do our part to supporting local to the extent possible. And for the big businesses that are doing okay, consider rather than going to the mainland to find these resources, trying to support the local, because we need to do we need to do this together, and that's what will help move the economy forward. Yes, we did see many of our local businesses have to adapt overnight. Many of them, so let's say, for example, retail did not have an e-commerce capability, and that's something that wasn't in their business plan, but they had to pivot overnight to do that. And a number of organizations, whether it's chamber or retail merchants association or other organizations, also stepped up to help provide them the resources and make that transition. But in the long term, we are going to have to look at economic diversification. I know we've been talking about it for a very long time, but I think hopefully with this challenge now, these will be opportunities, because there are so many great resources in Hawaii that we can leverage. There's already a number of established accelerators, Elementa Accelerator, Blue Startups, Accelerate, that are doing great stuff. So how can we leverage our existing resources and incorporate innovation technology?
Mm-hmm. So important. And Joffrey, what about you on your end? What are you hearing in terms of what businesses are doing to adapt and diversify? I mean, are they trying to move away from tourism dependence?
Well, to piggyback on Sherry's comments about buying local, DBED, the Department of Business and Economic Tourism, DBED, with Dennis Ling and Marlene Hiraoka, they're putting out a campaign to buy local. It's called Buy Hawaii. So at the DBED website, small businesses local businesses can input their information, and it can be listed on the state website, and encourage people to buy local, just so we can help our brothers and sisters in business survive this shortfall. And so it's a grassroots effort, really, locally, trying to just support each other, and it takes us to help each other out, and that's what Hawaii is about. It's about helping your fellow neighbor, and I think it's what we need to do.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what about you, Andrea? What's your take on all of this?
So we wanted the Hawaii businesses and our government partners to see us as a partner in diversification. There's a lot of ways that our companies in the Philippines can work together with Hawaii companies in order for us to be able to create new industries that are not necessarily tied to tourism. We all know that one of the concerns that we have here in Hawaii is we don't really have a strong manufacturing sector. And we also see the problem with over-reliance on one particular supplier, such as China. When the pandemic hit, our supply chains got hit very severely because of our over-reliance to one particular supplier. And the Philippines can offer a sort of a solution to that kind of issues. We could provide the raw materials that are not available here in Hawaii. We could also provide some of the support services, because we also know that one of the concerns that Hawaii has is the shortage of labor in certain industries. And there are a lot of ways wherein our companies in the Philippines can supply that labor without having to go here in the Philippines. So we really are committed in being a partner of Hawaii businesses in pursuing this diversification strategy.
Yeah, good point. This really is the time to rethink how we're doing things right now, building those bridges and pipelines. I know I'm a business reporter by heart. And so I know I've covered Congressman Case's reform for the Jones Act. So that's, this is another discussion, how expensive it is to ship all of these goods to our businesses and raw materials, and it just doesn't make any economic sense, right? So what's the status on that? That's a personal interest of mine.
Well, the Jones Act would significantly reduce, I believe, the cost of shipping to and from Hawaii, which is one of the largest costs for our businesses here and our consumers. Tremendous premium on prices because we restrict the supply of shipping, and so there's a great opposition to reforming the Jones Act, because it's a very lucrative federal law to the shippers that are protected by the Jones Act, and they're very, very interested in keeping the Jones Act in place. So they're not very happy with me questioning it at all. But I think to the broader question, if there's any silver lining at all in COVID-19, it is an opportunity for us to ask these questions again. Because we were just, cruising along like, everything was, hunky-dory, lowest unemployment rate in the country, and tourism was pumping. And when you're in those kind of times, you tend not to see the fault lines in your business or your business model or your society. And so when they get ripped open like this, let's at least try to think about what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. For example, are we doing the right kind of tourism? I'm not sure we are doing the right kind of tourism. We need tourism back, but do we need it back the same way? Why should we have a different brand of tourism that's really a higher value tourism? Same jobs, same economic contribution, but not 10, 15 million people. I think we probably need to do that. Let's not forget our military. We take the military for granted, and frankly, in Hawaii, we have a fair number of folks who don't think our military should be here. But where would we be right now without the military contributions, which is our second largest contributor? So we are diversified in that way. And then Joffrey, of course, in construction. Construction is our third largest industry, and he's going along okay because the federal government is still spending, the state government is still spending because folks are still investing in construction, and sometimes people don't want to support that. And then agriculture, I could say the same thing. Astronomy, education, technology. We've talked about these things for decades. Okay, here's the reality. The reality is that we are so exposed because we've got one industry that's really our largest, that if it dries up, this is what happens. So can we use this as an opportunity to ask ourselves, what can we do better? I think we have to.
Mm-hmm. We talked about, the new normal and how we're going to protect ourselves. You all mentioned social distancing as tourism reopens. We did have a question on Facebook about mandatory masks. What do you think, Representative Case? Is that something that we should be instituting? You said mandatory testing before arriving. What about mandatory masks for all of us?
Well, in certain situations, absolutely. I got on, I had to come back to DC a couple of times in, April and May. And first time I got on a plane to come back to DC, they weren't requiring masks on that plane. And I felt really unsafe. Yes, they should have required a mask on that plane, required and enforced. Because first the airlines didn't require it, and then second they required it but didn't enforce it. Now they're getting around to enforcing it. So that's a little late in the game. So yeah, if somebody is going to go into a public place in a confined area, I do believe that they should be required to wear a mask. Let's remember that the mask is not so much to protect you from other people; it's to protect other people from you. So it only works if everybody is actually doing it. That's not just a public health comment. That's also an economic comment, because if we're not safe in Hawaii. If people don't feel that Hawaii is a safe place to come because we're not complying with these basic requirements, they're going to go somewhere else in the world. They can make that choice. They're not going to use discretionary income and then also risk their families over this. So I think that is something that we should do.
Yeah, I feel like it's interesting considering the comments that came out of that Palm Beach City Council with the masks. I found that very entertaining. But really kind of mind-boggling. Sorry, we are almost out of time, but I just wanted to fit one last question from a viewer on Facebook. I'm just going to read it. How is the state of Hawaii supposed to determine which tourists need to be quarantined and those that took the test that are not in quarantine? I don't know if that's something that we could address, but did you want to weigh in on that, Representative? Just about quarantine in general?
The quarantine is going to stay in place after August 1st. What the governor has said is if you take a test and you're negative before you get on a plane, you don't have to go into the quarantine. So until we see a much better, so you can kind of, choose your medicine there, so to speak. You can take the test and not have to quarantine, or you can not take the test in quarantine, or the third option, which is unfortunately still around, is you can do neither and quarantine and then sneak out of the quarantine. So we need much more enforcement of that quarantine, really, to keep ourselves safe. That's what's going on with that.
All right. Well, we are down to the wire, but I wanted to thank everyone again for giving us all of this valuable insight. Thank you to our radio listeners. I know they have to jump off exactly at 1:30. They are on a very strict time schedule. But here on Facebook Live, I could go on forever, but I know all of you have your Sunday to go to spend with your family. So thank you so much again for joining us today. Our distinguished panel, Congressman Ed Case, thank you so much for joining us from Washington, D.C. Sherry Minor McNamara, of course, the President and CEO of the Hawaii Chamber of Commerce, and Andrea Camo from the Philippine Consulate General. Thank you. And Joffrey Kodyamat for the incoming president of the Filipino Chamber of Commerce, and of course a construction guru here. I'm just going to label you a construction expert. You can be one of our construction panelists next time for my show. And Eddie Sokol, U.S. Census Bureau specialist. Thank you again for joining us. And you can see the replay of this on our Facebook at Filipino Count Committee, as well as here on KITV. And mahalo, everybody.
Mahalo.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mahalo.
Enjoy. Take care. Stay safe.
Take care. Thank you, Annalisa.